Good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Good, that's just review for you. So, okay, so we're on 3A, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Yeah, we had another contradiction. The contradiction was that a sin offering that was slaughtered for the sake of an Ola offering is invalid, but if you slaughter the sin offering for the sake of a non-sacrificial offering, just for for a barbecue, you slaughter the sin offering for for hamburgers tonight, so that's going to still be a valid sin offering. So the Gemara said that basically one of its kind can destroy it, can interfere with it, but one that's not of its kind cannot. So to ruin it, you have to be from the sacrificial offering world. But therefore, if you have that intention, it can ruin it. But if you have it for the barbecue, that's too much of a non-factor. That's not going to interfere. On that says the Brisa of Tanya. So we know that some vessels, the earthenware vessel, if there's anything in the interior, then it will cause impurity to anything else in the interior. So if you have a vessel, a earthenware vessel, and inside the earthenware vessel you put a piece of cake, and then all of a sudden a sheretz, an insect was hanging on the inside of that vessel, everything inside is going to become impure. The Hatanya says the Brisa toko below toko. That's only everything inside the interior, but not inside the interior of the interior. So if you have something inside the interior, another vessel inside of there with food inside of that, then it's not going to impurify it. Says the Gemara, what we need is the next part. Even a vessel that can become pure through immersion. So meaning these vessels are earthenware vessels. You have to break it there's no way to put it in a mikvah. But even if you have something which is not of its kind, which is similar to us in terms of slaughtering a sin offering for the sake of your barbecue, right? So it's not of its kind, and yet it's still going to save the food inside of it. So what do you see? You see that even though it's not of its kind, it does interfere. It does cause problems. It does prevent the tumah from invading its interior. So if that's true, it's not of its kind. It does interfere. So too, shechting for the sake of a non-sacrificial offering, like a barbecue, that should also interfere.
So if it's like a metal container.
Perfect. Good. Exactly.
So it's an earthenware container.
That's interesting. An earthenware inside of an earthenware container? Sounds like no, it would save the food. But that's fine, because that's earthenware and earthenware. Mm-hmm. So that could interfere because it's from the same kind. But if it's a metal container, something that you could put in the mikvah, so that's not earthenware. That has different rules. And yet it also prevents the impurity from going inside. So not only does a vessel of its kind prevent impurity from going inside the vessel, but even not of its kind will still interfere. And now we say, well, that's a problem. We thought not of its kind cannot interfere. It should be a non-factor. So, yeah, so, okay. So that the Gemara says, Vishani, no, big difference. Also, really, we came with an assumption that a vessel that can be put into the mikvah is it's not from the same kind of vessel. Really, it's still a vessel. So it really is from the same kind of, from the same category. What's a different category? A mechitza in a tanner, a partition inside of an oven. Just a partition, not a vessel. A partition in an oven, that's not going to do anything. Just you put up a wall in your oven, so you have food on the right side and impurity on the left side, the food on the right side will still become impure. That random wall in the middle, that's going to be a non-factor. So this is more similar to that. So lo mahanya leklal, it's a question lo mahanya leklal. So too, the non-factor of the having in mind for chulin, for a non-sacrificial offering, is also not going to ruin it at all. Just like a wall in an oven is not going to ruin it at all. Where do we know that that is true? It's not tanner shechatzu ben asar. You have a tanner, an oven, which is shechatzu ben asar. You put boards or urios or curtains inside. V'nimtza sheretz b'makom echad. On one side you have a sheretz, one of the insects that cause impurity. Hakol tameh. The entire oven is impure. Even the ones on the other side of the partition are impure. What do you see? The fact that you have a wall there, this partition, that's a non-factor. It doesn't do anything. Imagine you're giving a big lecture to somebody about a certain topic. So if all the professors are there that are on the same, that know what you're talking about, that gets you nervous. You might make a mistake. If a third grader walks in and he sits in the back, that's a non-factor. You're not worried about his questions, right? He's not going to do anything to you. So same thing. These things are not factors, and therefore everything's going to be impure. Some of those. Yeah, one time I was taken as a 9-year-old to Manus Friedman, a famous Chabad rabbi. One of his lectures for grown-ups. My family friends took me to. I just sat in the. I don't know what he was saying, but I laughed at all his jokes. So he thanked me afterwards for laughing at all his jokes. I have no idea what he's saying. I was totally over my head. So these partitions they're non-factors. Now, though, the Mishnah says though a kaveris, that you have a beehive. I haven't got pictures there. A hive, she pechusa. Pechusa, like it's very it's not strong at all. It's like a broken hive that it has holes in it. It's not a good hive. Upakuka bakash, and you fill in the holes with straw. And what is it? It's mishul shelas la'avir. It's hanging down in the airspace, a tonner of the oven. So now, sheretz besocha. If you have a sheret, an insect, inside this hive, the entire oven is going to be impure. Because this kind of hive, it's not a good hive. It has holes in it. That's really nothing. So therefore, the impurity will still spread to the entire oven. So sheretz besocha taner tameh. Sheretz betaner, if you have now an insect in the oven, so then it goes both ways. The food inside the hive is going to be impure. And the food inside the hive are going to be impure. Rabbi Eliezer mitaher. Rabbi Eliezer, we're getting involved in him in a second. He purifies it. He holds that this hive will help. So any food inside this kind of hive will remain pure even if there's an insect in the oven. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that? Where does he get that from? Rabbi Eliezer kal v'chomer. It's a kal v'chomer. If such a thing helps, when we talk about the most stringent kind of impurity, which is the impurity of a dead person, im hitzil b'meis hachomer. It's so chomer. It's so stringent. Lo tatzil b'plicheres hakal. We're not going to apply this leniency to a much lower level sanctity of impurity, like an earthenware vessel. So if by a case of a dead person, that impurity will not spread to the hive, so too here. So to here, it also won't spread. Can't be better, can't be more strict on the impurity of a dead person. So how do the rabbis respond to him? Well, they say no. Im hitzil b'meis and chomer is a big difference. When we're talking about the dead person, he's in a tent, classic case in an ohel. The second is ohel. He's in an enclosed structure. What happens in those structures? It's common, it's normal to put up partitions, to have things that are separated over there. Shekan chaluka ba'olin tatzil. So there, it's normal. It's normal to put up a mechitza, to put up different separations in a ohel. That's why if you have food inside your partition, a hive or whatever you have in your tent, it'll be saved. However, the kli charis in your earthenware vessel, in our case in the oven, it's not normal to put these things there. So therefore, it's not going to be a factor, and it will still impurify the food. Yeah. Okay. So that's his kal v'chomer. Now, says the Gemara. So this whole thing was brought because we said that when you have in mind that you slaughter a chatas offering, if you have in mind for a different sacrificial offering, let's say like an ola, it's invalid. But if you have in mind for your barbecue, that's not going to invalidate it. So says the Gemara, hatenach l'Rabbanan, that's very good according to the Rabbanan. According to the Rabbanan who just told us that a mechitza, that a partition will be a non-factor inside the earthenware oven. So that makes sense that you have this distinction, that you have a non-factor like a wall separating, and it doesn't do anything. But the Rabbi Eliezer, who just told us that by the beehive, and it sounds like any other partitions too, that will be a factor. So then the whole principle is knocked out. What's the difference? By an oven, we see things that are not vessels, that are partitions, are factors, and they will ruin the impurity, meaning the impurity will not go through those partitions. even though it itself is a non-factor. So how come when you slaughter an animal and you have in mind your barbecue, then that will remain kosher? According to Rabbi Eliezer, we don't understand what the difference is. So Rabbi Eliezer, kal v'chomer, what's the problem? Rabbi Eliezer really agrees to us. When it comes to chulin and kachim and sacrificial offerings, he'll agree to us. Here, he has a kal v'chomer. Here, when it came to the earthenware vessel, he said that it can't be any worse. It can't be more stringent than a dead body in a tent where a partition does separate. For sure, the more lenient kind of impurity, it also separates. So Rabbi Eliezer really agrees to us. Everyone's on the same page about your sacrificial offering. Here, he had a kal v'chomer. That's all. So, if that's true, hasam nami lema kal v'chomer. Well, why don't you say Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer? Apply the same logic to a sacrificial offering. What would that be? Kachim mechalim kachim. Kachim, are so stringent. Having the wrong intention with another sacrificial offering will now impurify it, so to speak. Will now ruin it. It'll ruin the offering. So chulin lo kol sheken, chulin, non-sacrificial foods that don't really have stringencies, so aren't they for sure going to ruin it? Meaning, kachim achatas, if another kachim can ruin it, so for sure, if you have such a lower level thing in mind, chulin lo kol sheken, right? If you're I don't know if you're davening Shemona Esrei and you get distracted by I'm just kidding, it's not really true, but get distracted by a Torah thought, and yet still the rabbi tells you you're lacking intent. For sure, you're thinking about the Yankees game. You're for sure lacking intent, right? So that's what Ezra apply the same logic. Not that this happens here. I'm just saying, theoretically speaking. Yeah, the Blazers, right? Not the Yankees. Sorry. So that's Rabbi Eliezer's logic. So too, a lot of intent. Yeah. So too, when it comes to the fire chiefs, no. So too. Good morning.
Good morning.
So too, Rabbi Eliezer should say the same thing. One day, fire chief. Yeah. This year. Rosh Hashanah, we what's it happen for? Yeah. So too for Rabbi Eliezer, it should be the same thing. A holy offering, if a holy intent, another holy intent like an olah is going to invalidate it, for sure having your barbecue in mind should for sure invalidate it. So use Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer and apply it to us. So that we say, we're 3b, 1, 2, 3, 8, 7, 8 lines down. Zbachim. There should be one over there. It was used yesterday. Yeah. So okay. So Ela Taima de Rav. Really, the reason for Rav is now. Okay, so now we're going to go back. Ela's going back. The reason why, when you have in mind another sacrificial offering, it's going to ruin it. But if you have in mind your barbecue, it's not going to ruin it. It's not because of that principle that only one of its kind interferes and one of not of its kind doesn't interfere. Rather, it's going to be a verse. What's the verse? Ela time of the Rav to Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, not Eliezer. Elazar has a verse. The Amar Rabbi Elazar, my time of the Rav. What's the reason of Rav that he says that one of its kind can ruin, but not of its kind can't ruin? Below Yichalu as Kachim b'nei Yisrael. So he derives the verse that it's that like this: Es Asher Hashem. Kachim mechalon kachim. Only the verse is telling you that kachim can mechal kachim can create problems. Meaning only sacrificial thoughts when you're shechting will create problems. The ein chulin mechalon kachim, but non-sacrificial thoughts during the sacrificial services will not ruin the service. So at the end of the day, it's not logic anymore. If it was logic, we had a problem with Rabbi Eliezer. Now it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. So if it's a pasuk, it'll apply there. And therefore, that only applies by sacrificial offerings, but vessels and partitions and all those things, that's not gonna. That's gonna be that's something separate. That's not based off of this verse. So now it says the Gemara, Alma asakra and afke mekal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, hold on. According to Rabbi Eliezer, we thought we had a good kal v'chomer. If having in mind the holy thought, just another category, should ruin, can ruin, does ruin. For sure, having your barbecue should ruin, and that was a good kal v'chomer. Now you're telling me that the verse is telling me that which we could have derived from a kal v'chomer. Really, it's now a verse telling me that. If that's true, so then hachanami, back to our earthenware vessels, why do you have to have a verse saying tocho? The word tocho told us only the inside, but not the inside of the inside. So hachanami, just say leise tocho, and lafke mikal v'chomer. Let the verse just like this pasuk tells you, not like Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer, sorry, not like Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer. This verse tells you that having a barbecue thought is not going to ruin your offerings. Not like Rabbi Eliezer's kal v'chomer. Apply the same logic to the earlier discussion by earthenware vessels. Let the word tocho teach you only something which is in the interior is going to invalidate, but not something which is in the interior of the interior. So let tocho come and lafke mikal v'chomer and remove it from the kal v'chomer. So says Rabbi Eliezer, I don't have that ability. Why? Hayi tocho mi ba'ilei le'ochlin shegiblan b'tin. Rabbi Eliezer says, I needed a kal v'chomer that we had earlier, that if you're in the tent and the impurity of a dead person the partition will help. So too, by a less stringent impurity, a partition will help too. And the verse that says tocho, that should be contradicting me, that says only the inside, not the inside of the inside, which means which seems to say that a partition would help. That I don't have that verse available. Why? I need it for something else. What do I need it for? If you have food that's like needed, it's covered over with clay, and you put it inside the airspace of an oven, and now in the oven you have some kind of impurity. So you have food. If it didn't have any clay around it, it for sure would be impure. Now it has clay around it. Does that change anything? So, if you touch this clay, which inside of it is food, and you are impure, that's not going to impurify the food because you're touching the clay, not the food. So maybe you would have thought the aviro nami lo metamu. Maybe you'd have thought just like by touching it, it doesn't impurify. So too, in the airspace, it doesn't impurify either. So therefore, aviro nami lo metamu kamash malan. It teaches you, tocho teaches you anything in the airspace. It will cause it to be impure. Even food that's covered over with clay will become impure. So therefore, he doesn't have that verse, and therefore he'll still learn the kal v'chomer that just like by a dead body, a partition will help. So too by a oven, the partition will help. The Rabbanon, the rabbis, they use the verse to teach you only the inside of the airspace and not the inside of the airspace. They hold that this idea that the food does not become impure, does not need a verse, and therefore they could use their verse for what we had earlier, that it was only tocho, below tocho, only the inside of the airspace, but not the inside of the inside. Yeah. Okay, up to 2 dots now. Right. Just review for you. No, I didn't understand. So, yeah. So all that happened is that we had a halacha that we have in mind another offering, an ola offering while you're shechting, that it's going to be invalid. To that we said, but if you have a barbecue in mind while you're shechting, it's not going to be invalid. To all that happened was that we thought there's a principle you could pull out of there, which was its kind interferes, but another kind does not interfere. To which we had trouble with Rabbi Eliezer, because he seemed to argue on that even a partition, a non-vessel, could interfere. Then we said, really, this principle by Chulin was not a logic; it was actually a verse. The verse told us that you have to have, the only thing that's going to invalidate this offering is it's its own kind, not because of logic, just because of a verse. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer was not a problem anymore. That's all that happened. The rest is just parentheses. Yeah. So okay. So says Rav Yosef Bar Ami. So now that we're talking about contradictions that are thrown at each other, we have some more contradictions that are thrown at each other. So before we had, the whole thing started was because Rav Papa told Ravina that you missed out on what Rava was doing. He had so many good contradictions and answers. So now Rav Yosef also had. So now, until now, we've only been talking about the invalidation of having in mind the wrong thing. So you have to have in mind for the chatas. Now we're going to talk about when the Kohen slaughters it, or maybe there's other services for you too. Let's say instead of having you in mind, he has Jared in mind, right? Really, I'm bringing the sin offering, because why would Jared bring a sin offering? So, so I bring the sin offering, and then the Kohen decides, you know what? When I had to fire, Jared wasn't there. So I'm going to have him in mind. He does have to repent. So the Kohen has Jared in mind. So does that work? Does that invalidate my offering if you have the wrong person in mind? Yes or no? So Rabbi Yosef, Zevachim's fun, yeah? So Rabbi Yosef Barami, Rami, okay, so he has the contradiction like that. Shinui Kodesh, Shinui Bailam. We're going to ask the Shinui means a change, a difference of Kodesh, of when you have the wrong sacrifice in mind, instead of Achatas and Ola, like we've been talking about. A Shinui Bailam. We're going to ask that against a change in terms of the owners. You have in mind the wrong owner. So it sounds like one case, it will invalidate, but by the owner, it won't invalidate. So let's see what that means. Let's see Umesha, and he answered. So now, that's the headline. Now let's see the details. Mi Amar Rav Chatas Sheshakol L'Shem Chatas Ksher L'Shem Ola Psula. Did Rav really say that a Chatas offering that was slaughtered for the sake of a Chatas? I think here means the sake of another Chatas. Yeah. If it's Chatas, that's obvious. So you have a bunch of sin offerings in front of you. So he has in mind a different sin offering for a different Aveira. So that's good. But L'Shem Ola Psula. But if you have in mind for an Ola offering while you are shechting the sin offering, so that's going to be invalid. So that's what Rav said. Now, same thing as before. Let's pull out a principle from there. Alma de lav mina machriva, but de mina lo machriva. The only thing that can ruin it is from its category. A chatas can ruin another chatas, but in ola, which is different, it's a non-factor. That cannot. Sorry, the other way. The other way. Yeah, thank you. A chatas will not ruin it. Its kind is not going to ruin it, but an ola, which is from a different kind, will ruin it. So that's the principle pulled out of there. Let's see how that follows through. The Hamer Rav Chatas Sheshachta al Misha Mechuyev Chatas Psula. But Rav himself said, if the Kohen has in mind when he's slaughtering the animal about someone else who's obligated, so instead of my sin offering, he has in mind someone else's sin offering, that's going to be invalid. But al Misha Mechuyev Ola Kshera. But if he has in mind somebody who's supposed to bring up an Ola offering when he's checking the Chatas offering, that's going to be kosher. That's going to be valid. So does its kind ruin it, or its kind doesn't ruin it? By having in mind when for the name of the offering, if you have in mind an Ola, it's going to ruin it. But when you're talking about who the owners are, so there, if you have in mind an Ola, it's still going to be good. If you have in mind someone else's sin offering, then it's going to ruin it. So that's a contradiction. Which one is it? Does its kind ruin it, or its kind is a non-factor? You got to make up your mind. Stomach. That was yesterday. That was yesterday, though, about the other way. That was about do you have to have in mind when you're shechting anything? Yeah. Right. So that was does the coin have to have in mind anything? I don't know. That's a different we had those 6 things you have to have in mind. It could be that it's still kosher. It could be that it's still kosher. He has nothing in mind. It could be.
I think that's completely okay. Last time around was the Kohen basically to say this is kates for whatever the person who gave it to me is the truth.
Right.
That's really a stuff on the stomach.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he has to have anything in mind, but okay, I have to double check. But yeah. Yeah, that's what Steve was trying to say yesterday. Yeah, we went along with it.
Yeah, because you bring 2 birds. That's very different.
So let's see. Yeah, look it up. So the Gemara earlier was 6 things that you have to have in mind, and it sounded like that was really a decree, a rabbinical decree. But if you don't have anything in mind, it should have been good. But let's see if one of those 6 is what you're talking about. I don't remember right now. Okay, so but this is a contradiction. So how do we answer this contradiction? Alma debar mina machri. Its kind's going to ruin it, but another kind's not going to ruin it. Oh, Umeshani, how did he answer this contradiction? Hassam, it says v'shachat osol lechatas amar rachmana. So you have to shech the chatas for the chatas. V'harei chatas l'shem chatas nishchata. There, basically, the answer is going to be that it's not going to be logic. The verse is going to dictate each one, the shechting and the having in mind. Right? If it's all based off logic, then we're going to have a contradiction in logic. If it's based off a verse, so then the verse applies where it applies. Where it doesn't apply, it doesn't apply. So therefore, the answer is going to be like this. By shechting, it says, "V'shachat oso lechatas amar rachmana." The Torah says, "Shechted for chatas." V'harei chatas l'shem chatas nishchata. So you shechted it for a chatas. If you shechted it for an ola, that's not called shechting it for a chatas. That's called shechting it for an ola. That's not going to be good. Not because of logic, because the Torah says so. Hacha, though, it says by our case, when the Kohen is having in mind the owners, the chiper alav, he has to have the owner. It has to be atoned for him. Ksiv alav v'lo chavero. I have to have in mind you and not your friend. So there, I have to have in mind you. If I have in mind somebody else, that's not what the Torah wants. So chavero dumya. Yeah, there it says chavero dumya dideya. Your friend has to be similar to you. Shemechuyev kapara kamotza. So you have to have in mind you and not your friend. Who's your friend referring to? The person who has to bring the same sin offering. So two people have to bring the same kind of offering. There and only there, the Torah says you have to have in mind him and not his friend. But it's only a friend in terms of he's similar to him because he has to bring the same offering. But if you have in mind someone else that has to bring a different offering, there the Torah doesn't say that that's going to be invalid, and therefore that will still be okay. So if I have to have you in mind for a chatas, I have him in mind for an ola, that's fine. The Torah didn't dictate that that I can't do that. So yeah. Okay. Fine. So that's that. Rav Chaviva Rami, he also asked a contradiction. Shinui bailim atoch tocho. Okay, so Shinui bailim is a change in the owner, meaning that if you have to have in mind an owner, the owner that's bringing this chatas offering. If you have in mind someone bringing a different chatas offering, that's not going to be good. But if you have in mind an ola, then that's going to be fine. He raised a contradiction in terms of our earthenware vessels, that even if you have a vessel inside of it that is a klishet that can go to the mikvah, so even that will save the food. So you have a vessel, like Jules said, a metal vessel in an earthenware stove, an earthenware oven, and inside the metal vessel is going to be some food, and you have a bug, an insect hanging into the oven, the food inside the metal vessel will be spared, even though the metal vessel is categorically different than the earthenware vessel that it's in. The earthenware vessel, you can't put into the mikvah, you have to break it. The metal vessel, that goes to the mikvah. So there we see that so even though it's a non-factor, it still interferes. It prevents the impurity from going. Here, a non-factor like the ola does not interfere. So that's a contradiction. And the answer is umishani umiya marav chatas sheshakta al misha mechuyev chatas psula but al misha mechuyev ola kshera. Did we really say that Rav said that when you shech a offering al misha mechuyev chatas for someone else who's obligated a sin offering, so instead of having in mind John, you had in mind Joe, so they both have to bring a sin offering, that's invalid. And then, but if you have in mind the guy that's bringing the ola offering, that's going to be valid. That's going to be kshera. So, and therefore, what do you see from there? Therefore, its kind will ruin, but not its kind will not ruin. Only the guy that has also a sin offering, if you have him in mind, it'll ruin it for his friend. However, if you have in mind the ola, the non-factor, it's not going to ruin it. And we said v'hatanya, when it comes to earthenware vessel, tocho v'lo tocho afilu klishetev matil, has to be tocho, the inside, not the inside of the inside. And even the vessel that can go into the mikvah, you could wash to impurify, that will still spare the food from becoming impure, even though that's also a non-factor. The vessel that goes to the mikvah is like the ola offering in our example. They're both outsiders, so to speak, and yet it does interfere. So the ola, having in mind an ola instead of the guy who's bringing a chatas, should also cause interference, and yet it doesn't. So what's the answer? So Mishani, the answer is arba tocho ksivi. It says tocho 4 times, and each one's going to be used for something else. It says toch and then has the vav, toch and tocho, toch and tocho. So let's see. Arba tocho ksivi. Toch, tocho, toch, tocho. Okay, now one by one. Chad legufei, one for itself, just to know that in the interior things will become impure if you have a tuma, impurity, in the airspace, in the inside, in the interior. That's one. V'chad l'gzeira shava, and one you need for gzeira shava. That even though Rashi says that the bug didn't touch the vessel, but it's in the airspace, That's going to be Xer Shav. So one is that it impurifies things in the interior. Two is that it does it without even touching the interior, even being in the airspace. That's learned out of a Xer Shava. Chad tochel shel zeh v'lo tochel shel acher. It has to be inside the earthenware vessel and not inside another vessel. And idach tochel v'lo tochel v'afilu kishetev matzil. And the last tochel is to teach you that even if it is inside another vessel, even like even a vessel that is a outsider, like a metal vessel, things that go to the mikvah, even such things will spare the food from becoming impure. So basically, we thought we had a contradiction in logic that its kind will ruin, but a different kind will not ruin. And basically, the answer is that when it comes to the earthenware vessels, it's special psukim that dictate it, and therefore it's not a contradiction in logic. It's just psukim. Okay, right? Jules says yes. Good. So okay. Yeah. So okay. So now we're asking basically. Let's back up, and we got a little distracted the last two daf. At the end of the day, our Mishnah told us that you have to have in mind the right intent. Kol hazvachim shizvu shelo lishman. Right? We said any offering that is brought for wrong intention, like an ola instead of a chatas, the offering is going to remain in its sanctity. Just the owner is not going to fulfill his obligation. So now we're going to ask, what's the source of all of these things? So, how do you know that you have to have the right intention in mind? That you need to have the right intention in mind. It says in the verse that you bring a zevach shlomim. So zevach here means to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice it for the sake of a shlomim. Zvicha l'shem shlomim. So that's how you know you have to do a zevach for the sake of the shlomim, which is the paradigm that you have to always have in mind what you are slaughtering for. And if you don't have it in mind, that's our Mishnah. It will remain in its sanctity, but the owner will not fulfill his obligation. The dilma, maybe zevach shlomim is just the way you refer to the name of the offering. It's called a sacrificial shlomim offering, not that you should slaughter it. The word zevach either is the name, it's called the shlomim offering, or it means you should slaughter it for a shlomim. So how'd you choose one over the other? V'dilma hainu shmayu. Maybe that's just its name, the shlomim offering. Not that you should check it for the sake of the shlomim. Midichsiv, because the verse says, "Hamakriv es dam shlomim be'esachela mibnei Aaron lo siya shok hayamin lemana." So it says, "Hamakriv es dam shlomim." You should bring up the blood of the shlomim. Hazorik es dam shlomim v'lo ksiv zevach. It says you should throw the blood of the shlomim, and it doesn't say zevach. The hacha ksiv zevach, and here it says zevach. So there, when it refers to the shlomim, it doesn't refer to it as the zevach shlomim, which is its name, what we think it's its name. It just says shlomim. So that shows you that when earlier it does refer to the zevach shlomim, it's not referring to its name, it's referring to the slaughtering. The word zevach is to slaughter. The slaughtering of the shlomim, which teaches us that when you slaughter it, you have to have in mind the shlomim, which then teaches us that when you slaughter anything, you have to have in mind what you are slaughtering for. Yeah, that's the ideal. Now, what happens if not? That's the Mishnah. We'll see more about that. But yeah, Shema Mina shedhei zvicha l'shem shlam. That you should do a zvicha, slaughtering for the sake of a shlam. Says the Gemara, we know that there's 4 services in the temple. One is called slaughtering, one is called walking, one is called throwing the blood, one is called walking the blood, and one is called actually bringing up to the altar. Those are the 4 avodas. So now we're going to go one by one. Eshchan zvicha, that's very good. Zvicha should be done. Slaughtering should be done for the sake of that offering. Great. Shar avodas mina alan. The rest of the avodas, the rest of the sacrifice, the rest of the services. How do you know they have to be done? Lishma. Very simple. Learn out from the first one. The same way slaughtering has to be done with the right intent. The other 3 should follow suit. Oh, so no. So it says there's a stringency when it comes to slaughtering, which prevents you from learning the other 3 avodas from there. When you slaughter the offering, the Pesach offering, without having in mind, people that were not going to be able to participate in eating that offering. So you have in mind for a sick person who's not going to be able to eat it, or for a very old person who won't be able to eat a kazayas, that's going to invalidate. So when it comes to slaughtering, we find by Pesach there's a special stringency that if you have in mind people that are not going to be able to partake in the eating of the Paschal offering, that's going to invalidate the shechting. So that's a special stringency we have by shechting. So therefore, you can't learn from there to other places because other parts of the service don't have that stringency. Right, but we still find that somewhere in the slaughtering there is some stringency. You're right, even though it's only by Pesach, not somewhere else. Yeah, right. You could have said that's a Pesach thing, not everywhere thing. Yeah, good. Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point. Ella Markra. It could be that anytime you find any difference, so then that's enough to break. Yeah. It doesn't have to be such a big difference. Ella Markra. Okay, the pasuk says Hamakriv as Damashlamim. That when you bring up the blood of the shlomim, should hate Kabbalah l'shem shlomim, the receiving of the blood. Yeah, the receiving of the blood should be for the sake of the shlomim. So when you receive when you do the Kabbalah, when you receive the blood in the special klisharis and special vessel, that receiving of the blood should be also with the intent of the shlomim. Says the Gemara of just right by Kabbalah, receiving of the blood, and then learn Shechita from there. Mishum, no, there's going to be a way to get out of it. Receiving of the blood has its own stringency that a zar, a non-Kohen, can't do that. Bizar ve'isha, a non-Kohen and a woman are not able to receive the blood of the offering. Ashkechan Shechita, the Kabbalah finds Shechita, Kabbalah have their own two psukim that you learn out. It has to be done for the sake of that offering. That's all shechting, and that is receiving the blood. Zrika minolan, throwing the blood onto the mizbech. How do you know that has to be done for the sake of the offering also? So maybe learn from these two. Leilef mehani, learn from these two that has to be done for the right purpose. Malahani shekain to unos safon. So these two services of shechita and receiving the blood sometimes are done in the north, in the northern part of the temple. The yeshnon b'chatos hapnimios, and sometimes you even do these things when it comes to the inner. There's two altars, the inner altar, but throwing the zrika is not done in the north, and yeah, and I guess the throwing of the blood also. These two both have these two things that are different. One is it's done in the north, and one is that it's done with the chatos hapnimios, the inner chatos. A few sin offerings are brought in the inner altar, and I guess. But zrika doesn't apply there. Right, so I guess it's not yet to throw the blood on the north side. Sorry, to
receive the blood
on the north, but the throwing you don't have to do on the north. Therefore, there's a difference between the throwing and the other two. It's not in the north. Yeah, what's that?
Is that what it is?
Yeah, there's certain chatos are brought on the inner altar. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not sure, but yeah, I guess at least in the north, we don't receive the blood we don't throw the blood in the north. Ella Markra, the pasuk says by throwing hazorik as adam hashlamim, you throw the blood of the shlamim. What do you see? That you're going to throw it for the sake of a shlamim. So now you have three. You have the shechting and the receiving and the throwing. So it says the Gemara, just right by the throwing and learn the other two from there. You're going to ask the difficulty. By throwing, if a non-Kohen does it, he's liable for death. So therefore, the other ones don't have that problem. So therefore, that's a certain stringency you have there. That's why all three so far need their own verse. You found 3 out of the 4, but the walking to the altar How do you know that has to be done for the right purposes? Lishma, learn from the other three. These three, you can avoid this service. In part of the korban, you have to shak, throw the blood, and receive the blood. But the walking, not necessarily. There you are able to, so to speak, nullify it if you do it right next to the altar. Therefore, you don't have to walk it. You just put it right up. It's right there. So the walking, there are situations where you're not going to have to walk it. And therefore, it's going to be different than the other three. The pasuk says, the hikri v'esakol, you put it all onto the mizbeach. The amarmar zu holeches evarim l'kemesh. This is the walking of the limbs to the ram. V'tanya v'hekribu zu kabbalas adam, and you sacrifice it. That's referring to the receiving of the dam. The apik rachmana v'lashon holacha. The apik rachmana, change it. The apik rachmana lekabbalah b'lashon holacha. It's referring to the Kabbalah, but it uses a lashon of holacha to walk it over. That lememra de holacha lo tafki mechlal Kabbalah, to teach you that the holacha is not going to be included in the holacha. It's a teacher that what the holacha is lo tafke mechlal Kabbalah. It's not going to be removed from the Kabbalah.
It should not be excluded from the rules.
It should not be excluded from the rules of Kabbalah of receiving the blood. And just like receiving the blood has to be with the right intent, so too the walking has to be with the right intent as well.
You don't have to walk on.
Right.
You have to have the intent.
Right. When you do walk it, you have to have the intent. But in some circumstances, you don't have to walk it if you're doing it right next to the altar. But in the other cases, then you have to have the right intent.
First, I first started with saying you learn it all out. So you need to have your mind.
Donna, I think he's off the air. I think it's 7:30 now.